standing room only. And I hope we have some online viewers here too as well joining us. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. Jennifer Smith is an associate professor in biology. She earned her Ph.D. from Michigan State University, also my alma mater, conducted postdoctoral research at UCLA, and taught at the faculty at Mills College for a decade before joining the faculty here at UW-Eau Clare in fall of 2022. Her recent career awards for excellence in teaching and mentoring include those from the Animal Behavior Society and Phi Beta Kappa. Smith is a behavioral ecologist whose research integrates perspectives from evolutionary biology, animal behavior, genetics, physiology, and urban ecology. Smith is internationally recognized for her comparative research on social lives of mammals. And as leader of the long-term study on the behavioral ecology of California ground squirrels, Smith's team of undergraduates, many of which are in the audience today, also known as Team Squirrel, combine naturalistic observations with field experiments, molecular analysis, and social network statistics to test evolutionary theory. We'll hear more about that today as Dr. Smith shares evidence for two major insights gained from Team Squirrel's study of California ground squirrels that inform our understanding of landscapes of fear and behavioral flexibility in nature. The findings also highlight the importance of long-term studies for uncovering animal responses to environmental conditions over space and time. Now, before I turn things over to Dr. Smith, I want you all to know that we will have time for questions and comments, so please be thinking of those. And to our viewers on Zoom, we encourage you to participate as well using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Smith.
Well, thank you, Dr. Benson, for that introduction. I don't even think I need to give the talk, right? I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you for being here and the folks that are joining online as well. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about carnivorous squirrels and other surprises from a long-term study. I will introduce our major questions in my research group, really focus on understanding how do animals respond to changing environments. And we use two major approaches. We've got a large team of folks, so I can see some of them are in the audience here today. We are collectively known as the Social Mammals Lab, and informally, we are often referred to as Team Squirrel. But I want to take a moment just to introduce to you that we're a lot more than that. We have a lot of other projects that are going on before I get to the two specific ones that I'll talk about today. So we use several different approaches, and one approach that we use is to use comparative studies. So we look across multiple species of mammals, including humans sometimes, to ask about general patterns in these animal societies. Most recently, we've been helped to guest edit a special issue on inequality. And in this, it involved undergraduates in some of the papers that came out, and really interested when looking across multiple species to address questions that are relevant to human societies and use non-human animals to gain insights into this. We're also looking through this comparative lens at multiple different species. These are long-term studies based on baboons, elephants, and dolphins. We look at their social networks, and we can gain conservation insights. So we can actually start to learn if we remove individuals from networks, how does that influence their resilience? And this has ecological implications for understanding conservation. Then the main focus of how we'll be thinking about the work today is the other approach that I love, long-term studies. So focusing on individuals from the time they're born until they pass and getting really long-term detailed data on individuals across time. Before I get into the squirrel work, we have several other projects that are ongoing. So we'll call it generally blue gold beavers. This is international work with University of southeastern Norway, so Norwegian beavers. And this is Marta, a grad student, and we have a grant together to support her work looking at stress physiology in beavers. And we're also partnering with the Voyager Wolf Project at the University of Minnesota to start to ask questions about stress physiology in these beavers that are local, as well as the ones that are in Europe. And so in my lab, we have lots and lots of beaver hair samples from individually marked beavers across multiple decades, and 800 samples or so that we're organizing to extract hormones to look at stress physiology. We're also doing some local research with some blue golds. We have trail cams that are set up. Sometimes this involves going out to different areas across the state of Wisconsin. And this involves kayaking and sometimes falling in the water, do all kinds of stuff. And we're getting lots of critters that show up on these. We have river otters. And I love these camera traps because they capture wildlife that might otherwise be hidden from what we might see in a more daytime lens of behavior. So here's some more beaver footage. This is just over at Carson Park. So we have beavers that are all around us. We can watch them day and night and get information about their social interactions, their building of these different lodges where they spend their time. And these will continue into the winter months as well. Most recently, we put up some trail cams just over in Putnam Park, and a lot of the students in here have done research out there for the 223 course, and we actually, in August, put this up, bobcat right away. There are also flying squirrels, all kinds of mammals just right there, so we're excited to get into more research with those critters as well. And then the main focus of the talk today, as promised, is this work through Team Squirrel, California ground squirrels. This project is based out at Briones Regional Park in California. Here are some members of the vole hunting study that I'll be wrapping up with today. So this work has been ongoing since 2013. It's in the San Francisco Bay Area at Briones Regional Park. And we've been using the long-term data, the same types of methods to live trap ground squirrels for all of these years so we can look across time and see how environmental factors shape the different responses that we see. Most recently, we've been partnering with University of California, Davis, and Dr. Wild is here. She joined us in 2022 as a postdoc from Switzerland, and she's incredible. She's been a large force in the field, and she's an incredible photographer. So a lot of the photos that you're seeing today are from her, and amazing squirrel scientist, and also capturing all of these elements of the behaviors. We have lots of fun in the field and use a lot of peanut butter. So Leo is here putting peanut butter in one of the squirrel traps, and we've got lots of students that are engaged in all of the aspects of this. So there's a lot of fun, big dynamic team collecting the data. Once we have a squirrel in a live trap, then we bring the squirrel up to the trapping station, and these squirrels, they go in, and we get really excited when we have live captures. And then from these squirrels coming to us, we'll bring them over to this trapping station and process them. So we collect a lot of information. We collect basic traits like age, sex, how much they weigh, but we also collect biological data such as DNA. So we collect a little bit of ear tissue for DNA. We use a flea comb to get parasites from the back of the squirrel. We also collect their feces. Pretty much every time they go into the trap, they defecate, and we can collect that from that exact known individual. From that, we're doing endoparasite work with Dr. Wheeler's in the audience in his lab. We're also collecting stress hormones, and I'll talk about that in a lot of detail today, as well as microbiome information. Recently, we've had a couple of talks from Ph.D. students that have worked with me in my lab, and one was by Dr. Person. This is in the biology department, and she just finished, so congratulations. She's at Notre Dame now doing work on baboon social networks, and her doctoral research was focused on California ground squirrel social networks. So I'm not going to say a lot about this, but other than to point you to this, and we can talk more about it, definitely a passion of mine. And because we mark the squirrels, we can observe them with binoculars and collect long-term data on these social interactions. And that's really a key aspect of this research. Then we also do a lot of things. Once the samples are collected in the field, we ship them back to Eau Clare, and they're processed in the lab. We've had amazing productivity recently. We just sequenced 500 different genomes from California ground squirrels that we have all of these other parameters from. And we're really interested to connect that genomic information to the social networks to try to explain the structure that we see. Lots of processing in the lab, and we've also recently published or involved in this collaboration of publishing the first genome for this species, the California ground squirrel, and that was a foundational study that will help to inform our future work looking at this individual level analysis. And okay, so that's a little bit of background of all of the different types of projects, just to give you context for a lot of the things that we think about in my lab. The two questions that we'll focus on today is first, what stresses out California ground squirrels? Okay, so that's the first one. And then the second one we'll wrap up with this other really bizarre behavior that we started seeing in 2024 of squirrels actively hunting, decapitating, and consuming. I saw somebody said, oh, I'm gonna wait and have my lunch a little bit later. But they're doing this behavior that we had not seen before, and it was quite prolific. So we'll wrap up with some evidence from that study. Okay, so the first question is, what stresses out squirrels? And this is a really key question in ecology. So what is it in these urban landscapes? Humans are everywhere. Humans interact with wildlife in ways that we've never really seen at this level before. Do we impose stressors on these wild animals? And actually, in some parks, we bring our dogs and other pets. Does that also influence the outcome of these squirrels? So to address this question, we use poop. We use poop for a lot in my lab. And one of the ways that we do this, I'll give you an introduction to the stress axis, which is also called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Where a squirrel, seen here, has a brain. It sees a coyote or something. You wake up late for something, you get that startle response. The squirrels do this as well. And they basically send a signal to their brain, which works on the adrenal glands, which releases a hormone. In squirrels, it's corticosterone. In us, it's primarily cortisol. That hormone then gets digested, metabolized, and comes out in the feces. And we can use that feces as a minimally invasive way of figuring out what's going on within the physiology of these squirrels. Okay, so what does this look like in the field? Here's Ella with another squirrel, a little Ziploc bag, collect the feces from that known individual. They walk in, the door closes behind them, gives them a little startle, they defecate, pick it up. And we get lots and lots of different squirrels, and we process these squirrels. We know exactly which sample came from which individual, and then we know these other aspects about their lives, and we can start to explain what's going on and how that relates to their stress physiology. So in the lab, we do a couple of things. It's kind of the alphabet soup. Some of these words are a lot. So it's fecal glucocorticoid metabolites. We often call it CORT for short. And we process this in the lab through several different steps. And the final one is to run an ELISA, which is an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. And this allows us to evaluate the relative concentration of these stress hormones in the feces for known individuals. All right, so we get lots and lots of data. This body of work that I'm sharing with you today has a number of undergraduate co-authors. The paper is currently in review, and we have a lot of data that have been contributed to this. So there are 4,500 measures plus of fecal samples collected. over 1,200 different squirrels, unique individuals, repeated measures on them, 12 years of data, and 2 different study sites. So, so we can use this to leverage and get really rich information from the data set. We have 2 different study sites that we collect the information from. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. They are close to, so this is Briones Regional Park, San Francisco Bay Area. There's a parking lot that's here, and approximate, really close to it, is the main study site that has moderate to high levels of dogs, humans coming into the study site. Then just down the road, there's an adjacent site that humans and dogs rarely visit. So this controls for a lot of other features of ecology, but allowing for us to look at those 2 key variables, number of dogs and humans in these 2 different areas. And that will be important for asking questions about stress physiology. So the first question that we ask is, what stresses out humans and dogs? And in fact, or humans and dogs, no, that was last week at Embark. For folks that are in animal behavior, you know about that. So what are humans and dogs now, or flipping it around, influencing the stress physiology of these ground squirrels? Okay, and so a dog walks up, and how does that influence ground squirrels? And so we can measure their exposure at a less disturbed site and compare a population that's just down the road at a more disturbed site that has picnic tables, et cetera. And what we see is, in fact, that there is a difference in their fecal-glucocorticoid metabolites, or CORT, the stress values, between the less disturbed and the more disturbed site. This also varies based on the age of the individual that's captured. So we see some difference if they're at the less disturbed site for juveniles compared to the more disturbed site. But the most prominent elevation of CORT is for adults. And adults are generally more stressed, more responsibilities than the juveniles that are usually a little bit naive about some of the things like rattlesnakes that might do them harm. And so this is at this area versus this area, 2 different populations. Yes, we find a difference, but what's driving this difference? So there's humans and dogs at both sites to varying degrees. So the next thing that we have been focusing on and wrestling with is we have all these different locations. This is the more disturbed study site. Humans often come in, there's picnic tables here, there's a restroom here. So this is a more disturbed area of that site. It goes from the south to north side over here, and then fewer humans and dogs are showing up at the other end of the site. And we're able to map where a squirrel is getting trapped and where and how often humans or dogs are visiting particular burrow complexes, trees, and things like that where the squirrels are spending time. So this is a big undertaking. For the last 6 years, we've been getting really detailed information on human activity and dog activity. They are somewhat overlapping, but they are not identical, and we're able to disentangle this through Bayesian modeling techniques to look at how we have usually high human activity on the south side to lower levels of human activity on the north side. We find really interesting results. The results that we find is that areas that have higher human activity actually have lower stress levels. So more humans, that's actually potentially a safety cue, maybe fewer natural predators around if humans are present, and they have lower stress levels. What was really interesting in these data, though, is that as dog activity increased, we also saw a rise in the stress level. So domestic dogs that are coming in, those are stressing out the squirrels quite a bit. And that's a very strong signal in these data. This also complements and extends some previous work that Chelsea Ortiz-Jimenez reported on recently in the biology seminar series. I won't go into it in a lot of detail other than to say we had this really cool, I don't know if it's cool that COVID was cool, but from an ecological, biological standpoint, in these long-term data sets, we had an unusual event where COVID global lockdowns interrupted the patterns of land use by humans. And this happened at Briones Regional Park, where no picnicking was allowed. And during this time, humans were spending less time across the study site. And this actually promoted a reduction in foraging behavior by the squirrels in the assays that Chelsea and us were all running together. And this suggests that humans' presence on the landscape is really buffering some of the risks that these squirrels might be facing. And she just published this work, and she also just had a baby, so doing all the things. And yeah, it's been a great year, and this gives evidence that humans are actually helping to reduce risk for these wild animals that are native ecosystem engineers in California and really important animals. Okay, so back to this current work. So we're also thinking about, over this long-term study, we have this unique opportunity to detect things that are otherwise maybe hard to see of a rare event, such as dispersal. So a squirrel may grow up in one area, and it may actually disperse and move to another area. And we can track how court or stress responses vary based on where we're trapping the animals. And that same individual identity is a big deal in stress physiology. So we can control for that and ask what happens if they move from the less disturbed site to the more disturbed site and vice versa in terms of their stress. So what we see is actually super exciting and really hard data to capture. And we look at before dispersal, and again, exciting from a biological standpoint, but also informative to conservation goals. Before dispersal, the animals that start, so their home site is what these colors denote. So animals that started in the area with less human disturbance, if they move to an area with more human disturbance, we see a rise in their stress levels after dispersal. If we look at the reverse pattern where they start in the more disturbed site and return to a different site and go to the less disturbed one, we actually do not see that recovery. So if they're starting in the more disturbed site and they move to the less disturbed site, they fail to compensate or recover their stress physiology that was already elevated from being in an area with lots of human and dog activity. This is important because California ground squirrels deal with rattlesnakes. These are two adult females that were forming a coalition. They're cooperating against this rattlesnake. It's already probably eaten a pup recently. And it turns out that these rattlesnakes have venom, and the venom is difficult for the adults to break down when they have more stress in their system. So an increase in the fecal glucocorticoid metabolites relates to the inability to break down rattlesnake venom, which ground squirrel adults are usually pretty good. They can get hit by a rattlesnake, they get venom, and they're able to break it down. But if the squirrel is very stressed and potentially there's carryover effects from these dogs influencing the ways that squirrels are responding to their environment, and that might put them in harm's way when it comes to one of their natural predators, a rattlesnake. So important carryover effects to think about. And so to kind of summarize part one of the study, so what stresses out squirrels? In general, humans on the landscape appear to be a safety cue. So more humans around, theoretically, there's probably fewer, and we've looked at this, natural predators that coincide with where humans are. But domestic dogs that come with us to our parks, those can stress out squirrels, especially when they're off leash. We've also looked at this when animals move from one area to another, so we can break down some of the confounds around what's driving these stress responses. And animals that move from an area that is less disturbed to one that's more disturbed tend to have an increase in their stress response, suggesting that a human-influenced world may be a stressor for these squirrels. But it's a pretty complicated story, the way that these stressors work. Okay, so this is part one, what stresses out squirrels, mainly dogs, and rattlesnakes and other predators. And then we're going to switch over for a wrap up, as promised with the title of the talk. We're going to focus on this carnivory by the ground squirrels and this really surprising finding in the summer of 2024. And then I'll give an update of where we are thinking about this really bizarre work. So in the summer of 2024, we have these field mice, which are California voles. And there was an explosion or population boom. The number of these voles is just really, really, really high compared to historic times in California. And what we started to see, and the students started documenting this, Tia couldn't make it today, but some other co-authors are here, documented this with photography, videos, and looking at these ground squirrels. So these aren't our tree squirrels, but the ground squirrels are capturing voles. And this was really interesting. So we were trying to figure out what's going on. The students and I went through iNaturalist, and we're able to, through iNaturalist information, look at the number of voles in California that were typically there across different years. And it's standard for these California voles to population cycle, but in 2024, the numbers were through the roof. And so this set up a really interesting phenomenon. We mapped this across the state of California, and it turns out that there was a hot spot in the summer of 2024 that overlapped with our field site as well. And what we saw through this, and we've documented it with lots of video, is these ground squirrels actively going after California voles and grabbing them, sometimes bringing them down to their burrow. Sometimes they would chase them for a matter of minutes, wrestle with them, because these are two mammals. They both have large incisors that can do some biting, and ultimately would wrestle them and take them often to go and eat in their burrow. Sometimes we'd see this above ground as well. So they're grabbing them. Sometimes they would get bitten themselves. The squirrel would get bitten by the vole, drop the vole, and then they would start initiating the hunting attempt again. And these would go on and on and on. And these are some of the less graphic aspects of the biology that we'll see. I'll show you a little bit more of how this looks, but then they would carry these off. Sometimes there'd be competition where squirrels would fight over access to a vole. And this is an example of a vole being eaten. So they typically start with the head. So they grab them by the neck, and then they start with the head, they crunch down the skull, and then they go into the internal organs where there's the most nutrition. And this would go on until the squirrel had eaten the entire thing. And this wasn't a one-off, so absolutely squirrels scavenge on the landscape, and that was pretty much known. But we started seeing this every day. So you get this happening again and again and again, and really cool photos. Another one by Dr. Wild on the team. And you can, this is a QR code, you can scan it here, or it'll be posted with the recording as well if you want to see more videos about this carnivorous behavior. So 12th year of a long-term study, never seen this before. Last year, never saw it again. Really interesting. It kind of blew up. We got lots of press on this. It's recently been given the Editor's Choice Award and was published in the Journal of Ethology, and this work included 6 undergraduate scholars that are getting to now be known around the breakfast table for this work. So super cool. And the original paper here is available, open access, if you're interested in reading and learning more. But what do we find? What are the data? So a couple of insights that we gained, a couple of questions that we asked are the following. So when did vole hunting and this carnivorous behavior emerge? And we studied this. So this is our field season, usually is June and July. We weren't seeing any hunting or consumption early in the season. And then in July, there was this incredible peak where it just started being really, really, really common, because we didn't believe it was happening at first. And then we kept documenting it. Huge peak in the hunting and consumption of voles. And then as we were wrapping up the season, it started to just go away. So that was interesting. We also looked at where this was happening. We have a spatial map, as I've shown you, for the stress study. And we wanted to know if voles and squirrels were overlapping in space, and if that actually contributed to this really weird behavior. So we mapped the squirrel burrows and the vole burrows. So the squirrel burrows are these green clouds where we tend to see those. The blue cloud point, those are the clouded areas, those are where the voles are living. And then the red triangles are all of the 74 different events of consumption and hunting that we documented. And what you notice here is it's pretty much happening everywhere across the study site, but it's more often happening where squirrels are living. So that's suggesting the squirrels are coming out and they're getting a vole that's close to where they're living. But it's pretty much ubiquitous across the study area, at least within that month of mainly July. So then the final one is to ask, well, is it just adults that are doing it? Is it just pups that are doing it? Is there an age or sex difference in who's doing this behavior? And in fact, we found none. So we can look at, because we know the age and sex of these individual squirrels, we can look at the individuals that we saw hunting in red for juvenile male-female, adults male-female, comparing that to the ones that did not hunt. We found no significant difference between those that did hunt and those that did not hunt based on their age or their sex. And the same was true looking at who consumed voles versus those that did not consume voles. And again, no age or sex difference. And this is actually a really exciting sort of negative result because it suggests that this behavior is completely widespread. Anyone can do it, and all of them were doing it. Well, not all of them, but it doesn't matter whether you're young or old. Everyone was getting in on the vole feast, as some of the media tended to portray this as. Okay, so here's some examples. Again, you're getting ready for your lunch, or maybe you've already had it. Squirrels are eating these voles, usually decapitating them, going for their organs and eating them. And so we have lots and lots of evidence of this. And so you're kind of wondering, well, what's next? This weird behavior. And so I'm going to just wrap up. We have a couple of conclusions from the second part of the talk. And we saw this emergence of vole eating that happened along with this vole boom, lots of voles, lots of eating of them. Shared space use maybe contributed to this, but it was pretty widespread. And also who was involved in this was not explained by the age or the sex of the individual. So it's a pretty ubiquitous behavior. So we're asking some follow-up questions now. We recognize that this contributes to our understanding more generally of behavioral flexibility, which in a changing world, if animals are able to respond to changing environments, is incredibly helpful. And the squirrels seem to be a good model for responding to bizarre situations and taking advantage of it. We're also going back to the poop, the feces, and we're scanning it for vole DNA in partnership with UC Davis to ask whether on a social network individuals are learning this on their own, or if they're more socially connected with other squirrels that are also eating voles. And then finally, we're getting back to our stress study and looking at survival. Now, I can give you a little bit of insight into the survival piece from the field crew that went in 2025. The California vole population, in case you can't see it, there's a vole head, lots of predators are eating the voles. And when the squirrels weren't doing it as much, you have lots of other predators that were doing it as well. But the vole numbers are down. The predator numbers have now surged. So there's a superabundance of these predators. And in fact, they are now taking ground squirrels. They've always done this, but they're doing it a lot. So there's really high predation, and so we have a really strong selective pressure, and we're trying to understand which of the squirrels survived and what was causing this. But yeah, they're having low recruitment last year, but we expect they'll be back up in numbers again. And so is this a case of apparent competition where squirrels and voles were at a similar trophic level, lots of prey became available, then the vole population went down, ground squirrels are still there, so are the predators now really focusing on the squirrels? And that appears to be the case. So with that, I'd like to thank all of the students. It's now, I think 140 undergraduates have contributed to this work across the years, different funding sources, folks that are in the room that have contributed. We're always recruiting, so if you're listening and interested, talk to me about that. I have contact information. If you're local, you know who I am. But if you're on the Zoom, please reach out, and I will take questions as we have time. Thank you. Yeah, Derek.
Jen, this question of, or idea of humans as a safety indicator. I would assume for a squirrel, the first time it ever encounters a human, it's not seeing that human as a safety indicator. Right? That just, the squirrel would be stressed. But over time, a squirrel might start to develop this sort of sense that if humans are around, these other things that could kill me won't be. Do you have any idea how quickly that association with safety might develop, say, in an individual squirrel?
Absolutely. So in the analysis, there were several other additional parameters, and we looked at the developmental phase of this. And so juveniles are actually really bad about knowing what's safe and what's not safe, including rattlesnakes. They don't really figure that out. So that's true for natural predators that are a danger cue as well as a safety cue of humans. So in the model, we have an interaction with age, and by the time they are 1 year old, so that first field season, they're usually not great at it. Some are starting to figure stuff out towards the end, but usually by the time we go back the following year, they're getting it right. And there's pretty strong selection on that. Yeah, great question. Your questions? Yes.
If the animals, the ground squirrels, see humans as a protection, as a safety zone, and they see dogs as a threat, why would they migrate away from that area into, all of them migrate away?
That's a great question. We actually talked about this recently in sort of our animal behavior class as a classic study of looking at dispersal. And for many animals, it's important for them to move away from their home site for spreading their genetic material and go into another area where they're not always with their close relatives. And there's just a long evolutionary history for ground squirrels moving away from where they're born. Now, what we see is slightly different, I think, in this study site than some of the other ones, where we see, and this took me a while to figure out, and we're looking at this in the stress implications as well, is that they have this area where they're spending time, they can move shorter distances, and they can disperse within their home site. So we're seeing those decisions being made as well. And it's really rare instances where you see them, or at least we're able to capture them switching completely from one study site to another. So selective pressures on mating, so survival and reproduction, they both matter, and that seems to be driving it. There may also be an evolutionary time lag, right? So they've been doing it this way for millions of years, and then human pressures on the landscape in California, the number of humans is more often, it's higher numbers, so they may not have had time to catch up on that as well. But we definitely see short, smaller dispersal events too. Yeah. Yeah, Nick. The best is yet to come with the parasites.
So I have a question just about like your overarching view of like these one-off exciting events. So like it's a long-term behavioral study, right? And you've been going at it for decades now. And then you have COVID and you have bulls that are exciting, like momentarily things because you can get a paper or an interesting study. But then does that like, how do you account for those like very strange changes when you are most interested in stress long-term? How do you deal with those weird summers?
Yeah, so that work in combination with this presidential symposium that I was invited to at the Animal Behavior Society this last summer was focusing on rarities in animal behavior. And that symposium, we focused on, okay, we've got these long-term studies, and we're actually having a special issue now that I'm helping to co-edit at Animal Behavior, looking at the importance of these rare events. They're really important because they help to break down what we think is the norm. If we can look at and compare it to theoretical predictions, and we see patterns that we're expecting, even when the animals are doing something that differs from what we might have seen from a year study, a summer study, but we can look over a long term. So I'm collaborating with folks that are doing multiple long-term studies to see what are some of the influences that we can see to probe the system to see what are the general rules that predict patterns of behavior, stress physiology, and ultimately survival of these animals. Yeah.
Is it possible that like they ate meat primarily for a summer, and now court has changed for the rest of their lives, and so now like all of the questions that you asked post 2024 are not going to as well?
That is absolutely possible. We actually already have the data. So we were able to process the fecal samples that have come back. We've done the ELISAs. The court levels are indistinguishable from in 2024 and actually 2025. They're also within the same level. What we need to do next is say, what's from squirrel individual. So this squirrel has an individual signature. I have an individual signature. So we need to see what was it like for that squirrel in 2023? What was it like in 2024? What is it like in 2025? At a population level, we do not, surprisingly, see a difference in this cohort, but there's so much variation there. We need to look at the individual level to see if they're doing that. Now, survival, absolutely, that was, a lot of them were getting eaten, especially the pups, so. Yeah. Other questions? I'm not sure where we are for time. Yeah, Kelly.
I know this isn't really your work, but I'm curious if you or others are looking at what was being replaced in the diet, whether they're normally eating vegetation or bugs, and if there's data to show if there were changes there due to competition with the voles. And then I'm just curious, did they get fatter? Did they survive better? The predators did great, right? They got healthier and had more offspring, was eating the whole the junk food, just those sorts of questions.
Absolutely. So we have the data. We have not looked at mass changes yet, but there's a whole another the upcoming study that's sort of getting ready to look at is, what's happening with the size of the squirrels, what's happening with that. Are they getting more hefty? It didn't really seem necessarily like that was the case. Is it a junk food? Probably not, because it's a high protein diet. So if anything, what we had predicted was going back in 2025, you're going to see so many healthy squirrels and they're going to recruit, they're going to have lots of babies. Food coming in means babies coming out because they're income breeders. We didn't see that because they were getting eaten. Maybe they were trying, I don't know. But the reproduction starts in the spring. Competition between voles and squirrels for food, not so much. So they're mainly, the squirrels are eating seeds primarily. The voles are eating herbaceous plants, so that's kind of different like that. But what's unique about this is the ground squirrels going and eating the voles, and especially at this level. So lots of open questions to follow up on. Yeah.
This might be outside the range of this, but as a mammal behaviorist, I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
And I'm asking this knowing that I believe humans are probably the most anxious creatures on the planet. But are smaller, at the bottom of the food pyramid, are the herbaceous animals more stressed in general than the ones at the top?
There have been lots of studies on stress physiology, and some of my favorite work is from Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, looking at baboons and kind of the CEO baboon versus, so being of high social rank can be quite stressful if you're being challenged all the time. And I think that also, that kind of logic, well, he started to look at that, but actually there are no general rules. Stress is something that happens to all of the organisms, regardless of where they are on the trophic level, and it just matters which stressors are going to be most salient to them. So if they're at a high level, wolves have been extirpated from California, for example, maybe there's a few coming back in, but they're going to be stressed with humans, right? But what stresses out a ground squirrel is going to be whatever is above it, coyotes, rattlesnakes, and so forth. But coyotes are definitely, there's a lot of conflict between animals and humans, and so they all have their stressful situations. I like to think of it as a faculty member too. We have all these different benchmarks in our lives. We feel like maybe we're a little bit stressed and kind of managing that. Students might feel a little stressed going into exams. Everyone has whatever's real in their lives, and I think that's true for the different levels of the feeding order in nature as well.
Thanks.